When a young version of myself was very lucky to be able to hold one of these devices in my hand. It was 1998, and the Palm Pilot that I was given wasn't the regular standard Palm Pilot. It was a Palm Pilot that a small Californian company called Unwired Planet had flashed with their own version of the firmware. And what they'd done was add a browser to this device, not quite a web browser. It used, a proprietary markup language, but it was a browser nonetheless. It was a device that suddenly allowed me to see that the web wasn't just going to be something that I had to sit at my desk to use. Suddenly, I saw that the web would be something that would sit on this small little screen that I could put in my pocket and go wherever I wanted. And I think everybody that was working in mobile or in the web at the time could see that this was going to be an exciting new medium. This was going to bring to us a medium which would be innovative, beautiful, disruptive, but most importantly, was going to be with us everywhere. So this is a quote from my pompous 20-something-year-old self. We thought this was going to be a medium that would connect the world, enable a global village. It was going to be a medium that was going to allow us, as I said, to take content, experiences, functionality with us wherever we went. It was a medium that was going to allow us to depart from the desktop-bound age of the 1990s. It was going to be a medium that would allow us, whenever a child smiled for the first time, we were going to be able to take a photo of that child and share it with our friends or our family or the other people that we cared about in our lives. We thought that was going to be a medium which, when we went out and celebrated some special event, we could, tag ourselves and say where we were and allow, again, our friends, our family, the people that perhaps weren't with us, to enjoy that moment. And we thought it was a medium that would empower serendipity, that would allow us to perhaps discover that a friend we hadn't seen for ages was sitting around the corner having coffee, and we'd be able to hook up with them and have a much more interesting afternoon than we otherwise would have done. So we thought that this exciting new medium was going to be able to let us escape our desk-bound cubicle lives. And of course, that's happened. It took a little longer than we thought. I thought it was going to take about 6 months. So mental note, don't judge James's timing with regards to predictions. But that is a world that we now live in. That is a world that we inhabit. Our mobile devices allow us to live this rich, contextual, social, dare I say it, web. But that's the catch. It's not actually the web. That medium exists. That new mobile age exists. But it looks like this. We can do all that stuff, but the excitement is happening on native platforms. It's happening on iOS, it's happening on Android, it's happening on that big swathe of other platforms that PPK just talked about. So, I'm a web guy at heart, and I think most of us are probably web guys at heart, or girls at heart. What happened? Why did we seize that opportunity? Why is it that the web is not this amazing, decoupled, unwired medium? Why is it that we have to rely on native stacks to make that reality happen? And by the way, in case you think that's heresy, I've got a couple of very simple questions for you. How many innovative, beautiful, and disruptive native apps can you name off the top of your head? Cut the Rope, Square, Pinterest, Angry Birds, Soundcloud, etc., etc. Infinity Blade. I haven't even left the home screen, the first home screen of my phone, and already I've kind of got to the ... etc. part of my answer. How many beautiful, innovative, and disruptive web apps, or even mobile websites, can you name off the top of your head? And where are they bookmarked on your home screen? Please tell me that. We have one, the Financial Times. The Boston Globe, of course. We have two. Email. Oh, okay. So, yes, there are web sites and there are web apps that we can use on mobile. But they somehow don't seem to engender the innovation and the beauty and the kind of disruption that we are seeing happening in mobile every day, but just not in the web. So, never wanting to miss some hyperbole, Wired magazine, of course, grandly declared, for similar reasons, that the web is dead. Well, I'm not going to say I agree, but I can actually see their point. There's a strong argument that says that the web is arguably dying. We haven't kept up with that pace of innovation. We've paid some sort of a price for the openness and the standardization and the homogeneity that we expect. And we're losing out as a community and as a medium. And why was that? Because back in 2007, when the iPhone was released, we had that opportunity to make the web, we didn't call it really HTML5 at the time, but we had the opportunity to make the web in the iPhone browser the first-class runtime platform for mobile. But for some reason, we didn't seize that opportunity, and it didn't happen. And I don't know, after a year or so, Steve Jobs got fed up of waiting for us to do that and went and built out a native platform. And of course, the rest is history. So why did the web community not rise to that challenge? Was it because we were busy arguing about whether pinch and zooming regular desktop sites was going to be good enough or not? Was it because we were obsessed with OneWeb and thematic consistency and the sanctity of URLs being far more important than innovation? Was it because we denied the existence of alternative contexts? Was it because we denied ourselves the faintest glimmer that people on mobile phones might want to do something different? Because the native app developers, they don't worry about any of that stuff. They just go out and they do beautiful stuff, innovative stuff, and disruptive stuff. So we have lots of great arguments about proprietary tags and CSS prefixes and client-side adaptation, server-side adaptation, feature detection, the list goes on, ... Those are all great conversations, but are they actually holding us back somehow? Because I think we always thought that the web would win. We always assumed that the web would become this dominant medium, and all we'd have to do is sit back in our academic ivory chair and wait for that to happen. We always thought that the mountain would come back to Muhammad, and the inevitability of the web was a given. Well, it appears not to have been the case. The good news is, however, that users don't appear to have got that memo. So this is Facebook's mobile traffic. So across all the mobile things we do, which is the simplest WAP browser all the way up to the smartest smartphone, and of course we have native apps, iPhone and Android. This is our traffic profile. So we don't have any numbers on the left-hand side. But let me assure you, this is a statistically significant sample. We have almost 500 million mobile users a month. And what they're doing is trying to use the web. Now, sometimes they don't have such a good experience as they do when they use the native equivalent of the Facebook experience. We try to keep them as consistent as possible. But, the folks that use the iPhone browser to access Facebook can't upload photos. And I think they wonder why they can't upload photos, because in the app they have no trouble uploading photos. So users want us to get our mojo back. They want us to make the web successful, and they want us to do what we always promised we would do. So what I want to think about today is, well, what is it that's holding us back, and what can we collectively do to kind of overcome that? What are the challenges that mobile web developers face, whether they be commercial or technical or cultural, and give you some ideas about perhaps what we, the people in this room, can possibly do about it. So I'm going to start with, obviously, the default commercial or economic challenges that web developers face. mobile web developers in particular. And, I've been to lots of conferences, as I'm sure many of you have been, and it's always been this, or at least these are three of the main challenges that are often cited as being, why it's so difficult to develop for mobile, why it's so difficult to develop for the mobile web. Discovery. How do I make sure that my mobile app or my mobile site can get found? Distribution. How can I make sure it continues to get used, and how can I make sure that its growth is assured? How can I engage my users, and how can I re-engage them when all they have is a URL bar to type, an address bar to type in? And then finally, of course, how do I get paid for it? Because let's be honest, any smart developer ultimately wants to make sure they're going to get paid for their endeavors in some way. And of course, on the mobile, on the native side of the house, those things are all a given. Those things are all taken care of for you. You get a wonderful app store or marketplace that you can put your app into. Users might even pay you just to download the app in the first place. Yes, you might have to run the gauntlet of getting through some editorial process if you want to get into the featured picks. But you know what? If your app's great, users will vote it up, and you'll work your way up the rankings. And plenty of examples of apps that have done that. And of course, if you want to charge for something in your app, no problem. In-app payments, just a few simple API calls. You're all good. The native platform provider has your user's credit card details on file. Off you go. And it's so easy to do that I think the web has been completely blindsided by these ecosystems, being quite, caught like a rabbit in the headlights, if you like. Because on the web, that's what a user has. They have a box. Perhaps it has a little magnifying glass in the corner. It has a flashing cursor. And that is it. From that, you have to get your discovery. You have to get your distribution. And somehow, you're going to have to get paid for it. And that is hard. The web's discovery mechanism, search, is not optimized for apps. It's not optimized for these rich functional experiences. It's optimized for documents with keywords in them, which was wonderful in the 1990s. But search, unfortunately, is not optimized for finding applications. Users have no way of feeling like they've downloaded a web application and hosted it, or running it on their device, installing it, taking ownership of that. There's no easy way for them to rate or rank or recommend that content to their friends or to anybody, in fact. And don't even start talking about monetization. How do I make money off the web? Short of advertising, in my app, how do I make in-app purchases? How do I get people to pay for my application in the first place? And this is all quite strange because the web as a whole has started to evolve to provide a lot of these capabilities. The web used to be, a flat, anonymous, document-centric medium. Every page that you looked at, regardless of who you were in the 1990s, would present the same content to you. The second decade of the web has been far more about personalization. The documents you see, the sites you go to, are often going to be very, very different according to who you are and what your friends have seen. And we've kind of gotten used to that. It's more of a push-based web. We have stuff recommended to us. We have, social media, dare I say it. So how can we apply some of those principles to mobile, and in particular to mobile apps, in order to try and solve some of these problems? And at Facebook, we obviously have a few examples of this, and I'm not here to talk about Facebook products, but the Facebook Photos app, when it launched, was a very, very simple application. And it was entering a world where there were lots of photo applications already present. Flickr, Picasa, et cetera, et cetera. And all of those applications, all those photo applications, were incredibly feature-rich. They had rotation and cropping and red eye reduction and so forth. But what Facebook did, and I think partly because they didn't have much time and they wanted to push something out quickly, is they only really added one feature to this. They didn't have any red eye reduction. They didn't have any cropping. They didn't have any rotation. What they added was one single feature, which was tagging your friends. Now, it turns out that photography and taking and sharing photographs is very much about people. It's very much about the people that are in the photograph. and it's very much about the people that you want to share those photos with. So perhaps inadvertently, Facebook had stumbled across something here, which was the sense that social design, putting users at the heart of the functionality, and in a sense you can almost ignore everything else, could make something compelling and successful, helping in this case to discover photos and distribute photos. Now, of course, Facebook Photos is doing, 300 million pictures a day, and larger than the next 5 all put together. And another example, of course, is games. So when the Facebook platform launched back in, 2007, obviously before my time, there was, in the console world, this huge trend around faster GPUs, more polygons per second, more interactive 3D gaming, first-person shooters, volumetric fog, etc. But the games that appeared on Facebook at the time, and very much still the case, were very, very simple, two-dimensional, isometric, low frame rates. But again, they had that one core feature. They had that social design at their heart, and they had users, your friends, taking part in that gaming. Again, you're discovering the game, you're discovering the gameplay, and you're distributing your experience, I suppose. Turns out that playing with friends is more important than volumetric fog. So the question is, how can we do this for mobile? How can we do this for mobile apps? How can we, in a sense, answer this question? How can we allow users to answer this sort of question? Because if we can figure that out in the same way that we have done for photos and the same way that we have done for games, can we drive that distribution? And of course, that at the heart is what Facebook is trying to do on behalf of third-party developers and provide some of these tools. And our platform, with simple SDK, you install it, and this stuff should become easier to do. And then we'll drive the traffic. I'm going to give a little aside here just to explain how we think this can work. So the first thing I should say is that Facebook uses a technology called Open Graph. Open Graph is actually an open web community protocol. Basically, Open Graph is a technology or a protocol that allows any web page, which of course could be a page within a web app, to become a rich object in a social graph. So this is the social graph, this is me, this is my friends, these are the pages I like. What if you could add other things to this vast network of people and opinion? What if you could have objects like a dish, or a piece of music, or a newspaper? What if you could have objects in that graph that describe real objects and that you could perform verbs on, actions? I eat a dish, I listen to music. So the Open Graph protocol is about being able to do that, and it's a combination of RDF and microformats and various other things. And basically it now allows you to tag web content, keyed on a URL, to describe those objects, and then the verbs that users, people, perform upon those objects. And I just want to give a quick example. SoundCloud. I think I saw a SoundCloud T-shirt somewhere in the audience. So, yo, SoundCloud, there's your shout. So SoundCloud is an app that does this, for example. And they've identified that the users that use the SoundCloud app, they play sounds, they like sounds, they post sounds, they follow their friends, they join groups. These are all verbs and actions that are taking place within this app. Rich sort of elements of functionality that are taking place. And what SoundCloud is able to do is basically articulate those in terms of the Open Graph protocol, post them, and then in the case of Facebook, you see that appearing either in the website on their timeline, or in the native app on their timeline, and you can see what actions your friends have been performing. So this is my friend Simon. He's been listening to a piece of music on SoundCloud. But of course, the point is that's a link. So if I see that and I click it, where do I go? I go through to the SoundCloud app. Actually, it turns out SoundCloud's got native apps for iOS and native apps for Android, native apps for Mac, as well as a desktop website and a mobile website. But the point is, regardless of the technology that's been chosen, this Open Graph, this social design, this discovery through friends actually drives traffic. So, like I said, I'm not really here necessarily to talk about Facebook, but I'm trying to illustrate that if you put users at the heart of what you're trying to build, you can actually work your way around some of those distribution and discovery challenges. And I also threw a quick slide in as well, because I don't know if you read, but yesterday we launched an app center as well, which will hopefully bring this even more to the fore. So Facebook apps will be sorted and filtered according to your friends, and that'll be a mobile app store as well as a desktop one. So that's a little bit about discovery and a little bit about distribution. Incidentally, we also provide monetization, but as I said, I don't want to talk too much about Facebook. What other challenges do we face as a community? And perhaps some of the more technical challenges we face as a web community are around issues of standardization and implementation. So what do I mean by this? So this is a sort of a Faustian pact, if you like. Standardization is basically the process by which anything that we want to use in our web environment, in our web runtime, has to have run the gauntlet of a standards body, or two, or three. And that is a wonderful thing, because it means that when standards do come to life, and when they do get implemented in a browser, we have some sense that they're going to be consistent, and some sense that we're going to be able to rely upon them. The flip side of that is the fact that standardization exists so that it can be standards can be implemented in multiple instances. There can be more than one type of browser. Of course, the challenge is that those implementations all take place at different speeds. The other challenge is it takes quite a long time to run the gauntlet of standardization. So as a web community, we buy into the fact that we want to have consistency, and we'll wait for that to happen through the standardization process. And when it finally does happen, we're going to have to tolerate the fact that not everybody has implemented everything we wanted at the same time. We could skip the standardization, and we could have proprietary browsers, and we'd certainly see features coming quicker, and certainly the APIs would all be consistent, and certainly we'd be able to get running on each and every browser individually, but then we'd be where the native crowd are, and we'd have lost one of our key capabilities. So we take part in this Faustian pact, but we pay the price of fragmentation. Fragmentation being that we never quite know what our application or what our website is running on top of. It's time for some pseudoscience. So on this graph, if we have some sort of scale of ever complex capabilities across the bottom of the graph, and the percentage of browsers that support that thing, there's a curve that looks roughly like this. There are capabilities over here that no browser yet supports. Holograms or something. And there are capabilities over here that pretty much every browser supports. Tables. Bold text or something. But there's this curve in between, and as capabilities become standardized and become more mature, and browsers start to implement them, we begin to see a set of standards or a set of technologies that we can rely upon. So a couple of things about this. Firstly, it has always been like this. It has never, ever not looked like this, the function of capabilities to support. The exact shape of it may have changed over time, and the capabilities that are on this scale do gradually march from right to left. So, in the 90s, tables was over here. You couldn't really rely on tables. No one had implemented them yet. And then some browsers supported tables and some didn't, and then eventually everybody supported tables. Yay. Right now, maybe WebGL is up here somewhere. Some browsers support it and some browsers don't. But it's always been like this. And so when people say to me, this fragmentation thing, it's just temporary, No, it's always like this. This is the graph that results from that Faustian pact between standardization and multiple implementations of the runtime that we are trying to build our businesses upon. Now, as a developer, this is the bit that really hurts. This is the bit where some browsers do what you need them to do, and some do not. And also there's a fuzziness in here because some of them do it, but they don't quite do it in the way that you thought they should. And how wide this, let's call it, the pain zone, or the fragmentation zone. How wide that is depends, or affects directly how painful your software development process is. Now, sometimes that's quite narrow. So in the web, in the early 2000s, where we pretty much had Internet Explorer 6 dominance, that was actually a very, very narrow window. There was lots that Internet Explorer supported, there was lots that it didn't support, but there really wasn't much in between. You didn't worry about stuff that was supported by other browsers or wasn't supported by other browsers. But in mobile, this pain zone is extremely, extremely wide. You just saw PPK listing out a bunch of browsers. That was a very non-exhaustive list. And every one of them, for a given capability, is somewhere along this curve. And you, as a developer, need to understand where. Browser fragmentation never goes away. So what can we as a community do about this? I mean, we can meekly adopt lots of defensive, approaches like, graceful degradation, progressive enhancement, please don't hurt me, I'll do whatever, Or we could stand up and say, we can make it a bit different to this. We can actually mandate what it is we want to rise up this curve first. Because we know the businesses that we're building, the web apps that we're trying to build, we know what they need to have strong support for. So how can we manage that process of getting what matters up this curve as quick as possible? So anything to do with the web ought to be associated with a W3C, any kind of movement like this. And so in February, we were proud to be part of a community group that was formed to do pretty much just that. It's called the Core Mobile Web Platform Community Group. It's not one of the standard W3C working groups, so it's free of patent and IP restrictions. But this is a community that is designed to channel the voice of mobile web developers around the world to help prioritize what the functionality and the features are that we want to be able to climb that curve as quick as possible. The members of the group are, again, this is non-exhaustive already, the members of that group represent all sorts of different corners of the internet and mobile ecosystems, but importantly, we have a large number of developers who are building apps on a day-to-day basis, and we need more. So I would urge you, if you feel strongly about this, if you want to take your destiny into your own hands, to please consider joining this group and expressing your opinions. Because if you're a photo sharing app, and you can't get access to the camera through your browser, you're not a photo sharing app. If you're a music app and there aren't any audio APIs, and there's no volume control or possibly DRM, you're not a music app. If you're a game and you can't constrain the orientation on a browser, and there's no hardware acceleration and no WebGL, you're not a game. It's pretty hard to write games for HTML5. It's extremely hard to write games for HTML5 that don't break when the user does that. And yet there's no way to constrain the orientation lock programmatically or declaratively. So that's important for those folks. So let's make that known, and let's make sure that browser vendors look at the specs that talk about that sort of thing and accelerate that process and implement them. In a sense, our culture of progressive enhancement and graceful degradation kind of has held us back here. Like I said, if you're a social app, if you're a photo sharing app, right now, there's nothing progressive about that. There's nothing graceful about that. You're just out of business right now. We've tried to raise awareness of some of these issues at Facebook through the creation of a test suite. This is called Ringmark, and it is easily accessible, rng.io. And the point of Ringmark is to, in a sense, illustrate what browsers are good at and what they're weak at. But this is not some arbitrary set of tests that we're asking browsers to run. This is a set of tests that we feel represent what browsers have to provide for us to be competitive with native platforms. We organize the tests into rings. So the inner ring is kind of like a state of where the world is today with contemporary mobile devices. And ring 1 is made up of those features, like camera access, like orientation lock, like all those other things I've mentioned, which, if present, would make it possible to build 80% of the top 100 native apps in HTML5. No browser today completes Ring 1. Let's hope that changes. And then Ring 2 is even further wacky stuff that we, as developers, we'd love to see, and which will help us complete that final 20% of the types of things that people can build on native platforms. So that brings me a little bit to another favorite topic of mine, which is device APIs. And I'm not going to talk too much about device APIs. I know there's a panel later on, and I also talked extensively about it at Breaking Development. But device APIs, I feel, are a key part of this. They're a key part of how we can lift the web out onto this next level. And device APIs, for those of you that are not familiar with the term, are, as described here by the W3C, client-side APIs, that is generally JavaScript APIs, that enable the development of web applications that interact with the device's hardware. Actually, not just exclusively hardware, but also the other services and systems that are present around the browser in the operating system. This will enable the development of web applications that interact with devices' services such as calendar, contacts, camera, etc., etc. So there is a, in my mind, very important W3C group, which used to be called DAP, which is working on this stuff. And the reason it's so exciting or important is that this is stuff the native platforms, the native stacks take for granted, and we have been denied on the web. Full list of the W3C device API activity is there. Suffice to say, these are around capturing content from camera, microphone. Contacts is obviously access to the address book, battery status, vibration, etc. Most of these are JavaScript APIs. The media capture API, there's two versions of it. There's a forms-based version, which is where you declaratively allow people to take photographs or upload them in a form. And there's also a much more bleeding edge, I would say, Getusermedia variant of that. Sadly, there are some areas of device API access that are not being worked on quite so aggressively, and some of which appear to have stalled. Things like messaging. I personally would love to be able to get access to a device's messaging subsystem, sending and receiving SMSs in a web app, but sadly, that seems to be on ice right now. And there's also another version of the media capture API, which has been deprecated again, sadly, but to be replaced by the new hotness. So let's just look at a few examples. Well, one example actually wasn't on that list. It's done by a neighboring working group, but it still kind of falls under this category, is geolocation. And I'm sure most of you are aware that this is something that's relatively well supported in contemporary web browsers, mobile web browsers today. Basically, this allows you to get the location of the user, their latitude and longitude, and it is literally 5 lines of JavaScript. Well, 4. And that's nicely laid out like that. So navigator.geolocation.get current position. Pass it a callback. You will get the latitude, longitude, altitude, heading, if present, and accuracy of where the mobile device is. Now, what are you going to do with that data? It's entirely up to you. That's where I want you to be innovative. That's where I want you to be disruptive and do amazing things. But this is something you can do right now. This is something very simple you can do to make a flat, static, document-based website into something a little bit more interactive. You could make it into a check-in service. You could, localize the search feature on your product page. You could add weather that was contextually relevant, or you could even build a store finder. So, one of my favorite examples of an e-commerce site, in this case, that has used this is Gap. You go to gap.com, there's a store finder. First thing you do when you go to the store finder is get prompted for your location. Once you give your location, it tells you where the nearest shop is. Really, really simple. They've obviously got a database of stores. They've had that for years. Why not make it so easy that the user can just find the one that's nearest to them? Yes, they had to go through that permissions dialog, but assuming they trust you to be responsible with that data, which in this case you do, why not? It's made that site more, dare I say it, contextually aware. Now, on some platforms, in fact, iOS is the only one that's implemented it, and it's not done it in a standardized way, unfortunately, you can get compass data too. you can actually get the orientation of the device, like real north-south on the device. So with a little bit of token science, a little bit of trigonometry, and apply the bearing to a CSS transform, you can build a little compass. Why not? You know the latitude and longitude of the shop. You know the longitude and latitude of the user. You know which direction their device is pointing. Why don't I show them the shop's over there and not over there? I don't know. What was that? 7 lines of JavaScript? Simple, simple examples, but giving us a glimpse of how we can lift this web out to be something more exciting. There's a whole sensors API that W3C has been talking about, which I think is kind of funky. You can get access, if it's present on the device, to the temperature, to the ambient pressure, magnetic field, if your users are working in a nuclear reactor or something. Unfortunately, the spec for this appears to have been thrown away and started again, so I can't actually tell you what the syntax for the code is. It isn't like that. And you might say, this is weird, this is wacky stuff. I can't imagine how I would ever use this in a web app. But in my car, the faster I go, the louder the stereo gets. I think that's a cool feature. It saves me having to reach over and turn the volume up when the noise of the road is louder. You know, I can imagine situations where your website or your web app might react to the ambient light, perhaps changing the contrast, or perhaps trying to deduce whether the user is outside or inside. It's a hint. It's not a definitive statement about where they are. We're not trying to do mind reading here. But we are trying to get some clues about the user's context and possibly adapt accordingly. I don't know whether Soundcloud would benefit from knowing what the ambient noise around the user was. They might. Camera access. This is the big one. I mean, in a sense, camera access is the money shot. So many applications could benefit from having access to the camera. And today, Android, I thought it was 2.3, but I was corrected. It's 3 and up. Support a declarative forms-based way to get access to the camera. Simply add accept equals image / star. Other browsers, of course, will gracefully degrade. And your browser will prompt you to either take a new photograph from the camera or select one from the gallery. Sadly enough, you're supposed to be able to indicate which of those you actually wanted the user to do, but the browser doesn't obey that hint. But anyway, at least the user has a chance to take a photo, upload it to your site, and in fact, you can programmatically get access to those files too on the client side if you wanted to do something clever. But this is the daddy of all device APIs, in my opinion, which is Getusermedia. Please, get excited about this, pay attention to this, because this is the API that gives you streaming data from your camera, streaming data from the microphone of the device. It is in the draftest of draft states, this spec, but the API is pretty reasonable to use. Navigator.Getusermedia. You say whether you want to capture audio, you say whether you want to capture video, or both. You pass it 2 callbacks, one for when that's been granted and one for when it hasn't. And you get a stream, which is basically sort of a magic internal URL that binds the data coming in off those devices. And you can then attach that to, in the case of video, a video element in your page. And you will immediately see the video from the camera getting painted onto that video element. So this is something I did at Breaking Development, which I'm not going to run into too much detail on here, but if any of you have Opera 12 on an Android device, please fire it up and go to bit.ly.gumsto, or bit.ly/gumsto. Gumstagram, Getusermedia version of Instagram. Well, not quite. But I should at least take a photograph of you. There we go. So that, you can't see it, trust me. It's a photo-taking app. It's a single web page. It's an index.html, one single file. It's got a bit of JavaScript in it. It's got a bit of CSS. Doesn't actually have very much declarative HTML in it, but nevertheless, it is less than 100 lines of code. And I have built a photo application that takes a live stream, hello, paints it onto a video element, and when I press the take button, it takes a snapshot of that video element, has to paste it to canvas on the way through, but it turns it into an image. And then at the bottom, I have a little gallery of all the images that I've taken. it actually chucks those images in a base64 encoded format into local storage. So if I refresh the page, they're still there. It's nothing special. There's a bit of CSS to make it look nice. But that's a photo sharing app, potentially. And I've built the core of that in less than 100 lines of code. So the web has still got its mojo. There aren't many stacks where you could build a fairly reasonable photo sharing app in 100 lines of code. Obviously, view source if you want to see how it works. No discussion around device APIs is complete without mentioning Mozilla. And PPK already mentioned that Mozilla is doing some cool work in mobile, finally. And Mozilla has come up with another set of device APIs, and it's called Web API, if you see it mentioned. This is a superset, and it's really super, because you can do some cool stuff here. There's access to telephony, for example. You can make and receive telephone calls. You can do USB access, NFC, Bluetooth, in JavaScript. Think about that. Pretty awesome. That could be one of your answers to monetization if you can figure out how to do in-store purchases through JavaScript. I don't know. There might be businesses in there somewhere. So there's a lot of device API activities suddenly going on this year. It's an exciting topic. Mozilla has really taken this to heart. As we've heard, a number of other operating system platforms have also taken this to heart, Tizen being one notable example. And by the way, the Mozilla guys are on a real roll here, and they're on a mission, because they're actually trying to build a phone entirely out of HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. This is the boot to Gecko device that they were showing at the Mobile World Congress. Nice phone. But you double-click on this screen, you can view the source. It's pretty sweet. It works. They even put Facebook on there. Yo. And it's Mozilla, so they've done it very idiomatically, and they are going to try to work the standards that they're developing as part of this back into the W3C Device APIs group, I believe. If you're a JavaScript developer, this is kind of what you would expect to see. I want to make a telephone call, navigator.telephony.dial, and a telephone number. I can monitor the state of that telephone call, whether it's dialing, ringing, received, whatever. I can hang it up, answer it. So there's plenty of cool stuff not far away. So we talked about some of the economic challenges, the distribution challenges. We talked about some of the technical challenges, some of the prices we have to pay for the web. But I think we can get over all of those. Those are just a matter of being patient or pushing the agenda onwards. But I wanted to finish off just by some thoughts about what I think could be possibly the biggest challenge that we face. And that is ourselves. Because when you look at a mobile device, when your clients, your manager, your designer, when they look at a mobile device, what do they see? What do you see? Is this what you see? Is that all it is? Is that all a mobile device is? A piece of glass that's 320 pixels wide? If it is, you're good with this, okay? This is a media query screen, 320 pixels. I'm done. Beautiful. And that's fine, and that'll be perfectly good for many cases. But that is not the answer to our dream of an innovative, beautiful, and disruptive mobile web. That's us thinking about the web as just documents that need to fit a piece of glass. When you look at that device, what you should be able to see is something like this. You should be able to see an incredible piece of electronics that is bristling with capabilities beyond your wildest dreams, certainly beyond the wildest dreams of my 20-something-year-old self way back when. And you have an incredible opportunity now and in the very near future to take advantage of this and build experiences that really capitalize on that magic. The dry capabilities and functions that you see listed on the side of the box, 10-megapixel camera, capacitive touchscreen, GPS, these are all little pieces of magic that will help you to glue together an amazing experience for your users. Because ultimately, it's not even this that we should be thinking about. When we think about these devices, we actually should be thinking about that. We should be thinking about the user on the other side of that glass, on the other side of that amazing piece of equipment. that is out, living their life in a mobile way. So sometimes I say, mobile is not a noun. Yes, this is a mobile, but really mobile should be the adjective that describes me as I'm using it. I'm maybe out, I'm maybe in. Maybe I'm sitting, maybe I'm standing, maybe I am running for a bus, maybe I'm not running for a bus. Maybe I'm waiting for something, who knows? And so I could easily say, well, yeah, we'll never know. We'll never know what those users are doing. It's mind reading. And it's true, I don't know always how to do this. But I do know that just saying, it depends, is not good enough. We have to think about how we can make the most of this magic and how we can drive the web onwards. It's down to all of us in this room to figure out how we can do that. And it is possible that the web is dying, that it is actually a historical anomaly, that it is a medium which just heralded the end of the PC age and was a thing of its time. But as we enter this post-PC era, I think there's a hope for the web. And if we can lift it up and above and beyond being a dusty bookshelf of documents and content, which, yes, needs to flow like water, etc. If we can lift it up and above that to become an operating system full of rich functionality, then I think we have a chance of keeping ourselves relevant. It's obligatory at every conference like this that someone will stand up and talk about how, at the dawn of TV, all the radio folks were trying to figure out how to make the most of this new medium. And at the dawn of web, all the document brochure people were trying to figure out how to get their content online. Yes. I'm tired of those cliches. The point of history is that you learn from it. So now we are in the midst of leaving. No, we have left the desktop age. So what are we going to do about it? Let's do something with our web that we can be proud of. Humans want the web to reflect who they are, where they are, what they're doing, who their friends are, who they are interacting with. The infinitude of contexts that they could be in. And they expect from us innovative, disruptive, and beautiful services that allow them to tell their story and live their lives. So please, unencumber yourselves from your desktop dogma and figure out how to embrace the wonder of the opportunity that we have ahead of us. I think it's down to all of us to do this, to stay crazy, to dream, and to demonstrate what it takes to make the web an exciting place for the future. Thanks.